Thank you for coming in today and talking about our pre-conference before your observation. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Is it going okay in the classroom?
Yes, everything's going great. We're doing fine. Just some normal math.
Anything I can do to help you?
Not at the moment.
Okay. So what objectives will be addressed in this lesson?
We are covering surface area and volume, and students should be able to understand this to at least pass the packet that we're working through, so 70% on it.
Okay. So this lesson, in the context of your unit plan, where is this falling?
It is in the unit of geometric figures.
Okay.
And before this, we covered circumference and area of circles. And we also talked about solving equations with algebra. So students should be able to solve equations that involve volume to solve for things like height and volume for that formula.
Perfect. So y'all have gone through solving equations. So yes, they should be able to use those formulas and solve.
Yes.
What about your students' varied learning needs in the class I'm going to observe? Are there any special learning needs that I need to be aware of or focus on?
Yes, so we have a few ELLs and reading disabilities. So we are going to work through some notes to provide a visual representation for the ELLs.
Okay.
And we will use those notes on the packet for that visual representation and connecting it. And when we work through those, we've already used tools for their learning styles. So they should also be able to use that to help them do well on the lesson.
Okay. So you're ready to plan and prepare to meet their needs.
Yes.
You've already have that in mind.
And also if there's any student that's struggling, I'll go and ask them and guide them in the right direction if they're not doing something.
As you're going through the lesson?
Right.
Perfect. Are there any particular grouping structures that you have in place? And if so, how will you hold those students accountable for your group work?
So we do have grouping structures in place. They sit in tables and they're grouped by tables. So how I normally, if I need to hold them accountable, then I will be monitoring the classroom to make sure that they stay on task and they're not talking about whatever they need to be talking about math, and that they're helping each other but not giving each other answers. So they should be doing what we call math talk. And we should be able to see them working and progressing through the problems in their work, like in their packet. If they see that somebody did something better than them, then we should be able to see them correcting. So that kind of thing.
Awesome. What do you expect the students to know and do after you teach this surface area volume lesson?
They should be able to, of course, solve for surface area of a net of whatever 3D object they're given. So that's like pyramids and prisms. And also volume of pyramids and prisms. Let's see.
So will you be using a worksheet? Will you be using three-dimensional figures?
So I will be using I'll be using a packet, but then for the visual learners, I'll be using the actual 3D manipulatives.
Okay.
So the 3D figures that show the net of the pyramid or the prism, and then I guess that also helps kinesthetic learners if they have them and they're flattening them down, able to connect that.
Awesome. Will you have the kids be drawing any of that, or is it just, are y'all going to just do the visual?
Yes, they'll also be drawing it. It's if they aren't given it, then the expectation is that they draw it.
Okay. Awesome. So, what do they need to know before this lesson in order for them to be successful?
We've already covered how to find area of basic shapes like triangles, rectangles, and circles.
Okay.
So they'll be using that obviously for to find surface area of a net, and then they also will need to know their basic algebra skills for the problems in volume, where we're solving for something other than v.
Awesome.
Yes. And they probably also will need to know some basic math terms like total and per. So
vocabulary is going to be a big.
Yeah.
Okay. How will you differentiate your instruction to address all the learning styles in the classroom? You kind of hit on that a little bit.
Yeah. So for visual learners, what we do is we have those 3D shapes or the figures, like I was saying, and for surface area and volume. And we will also be doing, let's see. Oh, when the students have been having issues with remembering what the question's asking for. So when we're reading through the question, what they're supposed to do is highlight the phrase that the question's asking for.
Like key phrases?
Yes.
Okay.
So that should help visual learners so that they remember and can go back.
Okay.
For auditory learners, we use mnemonics to remember the most used formulas, like apple pies are round, so it's A equals pi R. So,
okay.
And we use those kinds of mnemonics, and we also have circles for other topics, but those are what we're using for this topic as mnemonics like that.
Okay.
Then for kinesthetic learners, we have them point and trace wherever they, when they're reading the problem, or if they're finding volume, then they need to know that this is for the 3D figure that's drawn, or the for surface area, they need to be able to say, okay, I'm coloring this part of the net.
Okay.
So usually that is what we do for kinesthetic learners. And that's most of the classroom, so we normally stick to those.
Perfect. So how will you assess whether or not the students have met the objective for the lesson? What's your plan on that?
So they should complete the packet with and without the partners, like the tables. So, and overall they should have a 70% or more, hopefully more. And we have it where they know what's supposed to be group work and what's individual work. So we work that as a group.
How will you close the lesson and then reflect on that? How will you do that?
We will be closing the lesson by having them do an exit ticket, which is what we usually do for closures and reflection. We will have them compare what they knew before about 3D figures and what they know now about 3D figures. And also how when they look at their work, what they feel like they learned from their partner, which partner helped the most, why, that kind of thing.
So lots of class discussion going on here.
Yes.
Perfect. Are there any other special circumstances that I should be aware of before I show up for your observation?
Well, we are having STAR and benchmarking soon, so we'll be doing more reviews over past benchmarks to recall the information from the very, very start of the year, because most students get those wrong. So if we don't review it, then they may have a more difficult time with those questions. But that's about it.
Okay. Then I will get with you before we actually set a time for your observation. Make sure that it's not one of those benchmark dates.
Mm-hmm.
And then we will go from there. I look forward to seeing this lesson.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
I really enjoyed your lesson the other day on surface area and the area
great.
of complex figures. Something that I had never heard before was apple pies are round, cherry pies delicious. Never heard that in my 17 years of teaching. So that was something that I will use and spread around, because apple pies are round. That's your area for a circle, and cherry pies delicious. That is your circumference of a circle. So that was something that I learned. You taught me something. So that's awesome.
Love that.
So how do you think you did overall? How do you think the lesson went?
I think that it went pretty good. There were only a few parts where the students were asking questions that I was confused on what they were saying, because there are a few students who phrase things weird and in a way that I can't understand entirely. So it takes me a minute to respond. So I kind of felt weird about my responses to those kids, but other than that, I felt like the lesson went pretty good. And we'll probably talk about it more, but there were some topics that we didn't spend as much time on, and I'll have to come back to it later.
Okay. All right. So do you think the students grasped that lesson? Do you think they were?
Yes, mostly, yeah. We covered a lot in one lesson. So for what we got to, yes, the students did really good on nets and like total surface area. They really understood that, just because it's area, and most don't struggle with that. But they did have a little bit of difficulty on volume. So we'll have to go back to it.
And why do you think they had difficulty with volume?
Well, just because a lot of students struggled with finding height. So it wasn't necessarily when it was finding volume, they could understand it most of the time. If they could identify the shape or the figure correctly, then they could normally find the volume, because it's just copying down a formula. But when it came to solving for height, that was where the issue was.
Okay. I agree. I thought the overall lesson went well.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said before, the apple pies and the cherry pie, I never heard of that. So
yeah.
I'm super excited over that. So some of the things that I did notice were organization. Like when you have your binder up there and organizing, trying to find what lesson goes with what lesson.
Mm-hmm.
I can kind of help you more with that, getting a little bit organized on that so you don't get so flustered. And that probably will help you also answer questions that the kids ask you by looking at your work in those binders. Something else I noticed is when you're up at the Elmo teaching, be aware of your paper. I know you're left-handed when you write, so your paper's kind of cocked sideways.
Exactly.
So be aware of where your paper is on the Elmo. Make sure that the kids can see it. Yes. Right. A lot of times they'll holler at me and say, "I can't see that."
Yes.
So just make sure you're aware of that, where your paper is.
Mm-hmm.
Something else I could help you with on time management is because you were walking around from table to table answering kids' questions. And as you teach more and are more familiar with the subject, you will understand the misconceptions where the kids are going to have the misconceptions. Mm-hmm. And you'll realize, oh, this is the question that I probably should get up there and show everybody.
Right.
So, and you may want to do that to start out with anyway, because a lot of kids are scared to ask questions. Mm-hmm. So you may want to, if a kid says, I don't understand, or I don't understand what this is saying, or can you clarify? Most of the time, I just go up to the Elmo and I'm like, okay, everybody turn to page so-and-so, look at this number, and we'll talk about it. That way
Right.
everybody gets it, and you're not having to go from this table to this table to this table explaining it several times.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the goals that I wrote at the beginning of the semester was for finding misconceptions before it happened. And I've been trying to do that, but sometimes ones just pop up that.
Well, and as you, like I taught math for 17 years.
Right.
So the longer you teach it, you'll become familiar with that, and you'll see where the kids are struggling. And sometimes you'll know, like, that's why I always work out the problem before I hand a worksheet, or work out a worksheet before I hand the worksheets to the kids. Because if I make a mistake, then I know the kids are going to make a mistake.
Right.
If I didn't read it carefully, or, oh, they just wanted this part of the formula, or they just wanted that part of the formula. So that's why I always work out the worksheets before, and I've noticed that you do that too. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's awesome. What do you plan on doing to intervene if students are not participating, like in class discussion?
So whenever I see somebody isn't participating, or if a whole class isn't participating, I try and get them to first interact with me before I have to do anything else. But if for some reason there's those groups of students who don't, and sometimes it helps for them to get a piece of paper and write it. So usually when it comes to important questions like the I'm drawing blank on what it's called, but the essential questions, those questions, if I'm going to ask those, and I normally will ask them at the end of the lesson, just to summarize, then it'll be more of an exit ticket situation.
Okay. All right. So how do you create a positive classroom culture?
Well, we try and talk more than just about math. So I will try and connect their likes and dislikes and what they do in their personal life to math. So even though we do cover all of our math topics, we still will make time to have a conversation, and so that, I mean, we don't have this problem where students think we sleep in the school.
Awesome. Couple more and we'll end.
Okay.
We kind of talked about this earlier about how to manage routine tasks to maximize instruction time. So that's kind of like if, keeping your binder and stuff organized up there when you're teaching. And then as kids ask you questions, instead of going from table to table, it's probably easier just to go up there, yes, and say, hey, everybody, look at this question and explain it to the entire class.
Right.
That'll save on a lot of you hopping around from table to table.
Sure.
So looking back at your lesson, where would you make changes?
Like I said before, probably thinking more about my answers to those questions, and that will also help with the organization to answer those questions more accurately, and also spending more time on volume. I wish I had spent more time, and again, time management on volume than on the nets. Even though they did understand nets really well, I felt like I could probably spend less time on that because it's just connecting area again, and then spend more time on volume, and that would help.
Okay. So the effectiveness of the lesson I observed, how would you assess that? You think
I think from what we covered, especially with nets and finding just volume, that went great. For fully understanding volume altogether, probably not, and we'll go back and talk about it more and do more examples, and I think that will help students understand it fully.
Do you have a plan of how you're going to go back and correct that or address that? Or
yes, so probably what we would do is bring back some of our solving equations information from the past and connect that to the volume formula. So even though we are using a formula, still just having the same thing filled in, V and little b and than solving for height.
That was something that I was going to discuss with you too in your formula was little b and big B, because those
Right.
are two separate things on the formula chart. So this is what I hope to do for you is I'm going to come in and kind of model for you what I would kind of do differently. And maybe that would help you in going back and correcting these things with your kids and
fixing
Yes.
some of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anything else that I can do to maybe help you or answer any questions or any concerns?
Nope, I think I mostly got everything I need, and I feel ready. And I think from what we've got, students understand it pretty well. And when we get more time, obviously, we'll understand volume better for the future.
Well, you'll have time towards the end of the school year to address that more.
Right.
So I will show you some little tricks and stuff that I have used before. So maybe that'll help with you showing the kids how to find your height on those things.
Perfect.
All right. So if you don't have any more questions for me, then we'll end this meeting and we'll schedule a time for me to come in and model for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
I would always have the kids get a sheet of paper. Y'all been working with the math charts where y'all have been filling these out. I would just do a separate test on those formulas so they know what to use for those formulas. Because then it's going to be part of this one over here too. So, and this is very important down here on the volume.
Right.
And the big B, we're going to address that in a minute. But I would have them y'all need to talk about the formulas from the formula sheet. Then on the nets, I would have them, I would show them the nets or show them the three-dimensional figure because y'all need to discuss that, what three-dimensional figures are, if it's a prism, if it's a pyramid.
Right.
I don't know what's going to be the best way to do this. But I would talk about, this is a prism. It's got two bases. It does not come up into a point. No way I sit it will it come up to a point and point me.
Right.
And then I would also take those and unfold them so they can see it.
Right.
Then I would have them come over here and I would draw. So we've already discussed prism, and I would tell them 2 humps means 2 bases. So you're going to have a triangle. And I would not get a ruler. That's something.
Yeah.
Because if you try to be perfect, then they're going to want to be perfect.
Right.
So I would just draw my figures. Mine aren't perfect. And let them see that, hey, that's a triangular prism. And then I would also draw the net. And it doesn't have to be perfect. A triangle has 3 sides, so it's going to have 3 rectangular faces.
Right.
So I would go through all of those figures with them. The smallest is your triangle. Then you would have your rectangle. And that's something else is you can't call it a square unless they tell you all 4 sides are equal. So you need to make sure you tell them that and go over that and discuss that. And then I would draw that. And of course you need to draw your, and I would kind of draw them all different. I wouldn't do my bases opposite of each other.
Right.
On the, I guess what I'm saying is on the side, or they do have to be on the
Like opposite sides, but not like right across from each other.
So this one I have up here, and this one I'm going to put down here. That way they know it doesn't have to be that way. And then I would just draw your 4 rectangular faces, and they need to know why those are going to be 4, because a rectangle has 4 sides. Yes. Right. They have to know the hexa, which is 5 sides. And I believe this was one of y'all's questions. They had to draw a hexagonal.
Yeah.
And it's probably easier to draw like that.
Or pentagonal, but yeah.
And then you've got to have 5 sides for that, because hex, 5, oh no, that's 6.
5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
But I'm calling it a hex. 6-sided is hexagon.
And 5-sided is pentagon.
So this is penta.
Yeah.
Okay. Your 6-sided is kind of like your stop sign, but not your stop sign.
Yeah.
So I would go through that and have them draw those out.
Mhm.
So, and then we don't have all those shapes over here in our box, but I would just let them also see visually what it looks like, and then let them draw both the 3-dimensional figure and then the net.
Right.
We used to build these with marshmallows and toothpicks.
Oh my gosh.
But then somebody did Chubby Bunny and choked, and
Oh no.
so no more. So on our formulas, this is something that I saw. I'm just going to use this one real quick. So here, they have to write the entire formula. They need to know that because the STAR test, they may have to plug in to A. So they need to make sure. This right here, I noticed some of them were using big B, and that is a huge no-no. It has to be a little b. They need to know that big B down here means area of base.
Right.
And probably what you need to do is you need to walk around the classroom and check as you're checking their work and whatnot, make sure they have the correct formula, and immediately fix this if
it's a big B.
Yes. So I noticed that some of the students were doing that. So how will you go back and fix that?
Well, we would probably, I would first probably make an announcement, just like, these are different formulas. Big B is not the same as little b, like, clear that up. And then, like, actually write it out. And then, from then on, correct it if I saw that students were using it.
And again, another way to do, you could hand this back out, just this smaller little test of that where I condensed it.
Right.
And make sure that they're using the correct.
Big B or little b, right?
Yes, yes. Something else that I know that they struggle with is determining what the base and the height.
Mm-hmm.
So they need to know base and height. So I always talk to them about going to the doctor's office.
Mm-hmm.
And when they go to the doctor's office, do they get to sit there like this?
Mm-hmm.
Does the doctor's office make them put their feet against the wall?
Mm-hmm.
And normally they will say yes, and they say they push the thing down on my head. So the base, which is the floor, and the height. So I'm making a right angle.
Right.
So that's a good example of how to find your base and your height of a figure. They need to know that it makes a right angle with the floor, and I always do this with my hand.
Mm-hmm.
When they have the figures drawn, it's very hard for the kids to, and I don't know why, determine what is a pyramid and what is a prism. Right. And I always tell them, go find this point. If you find this point, that is your prism. However, they think on this triangular prism here, they're like, that's a point. And I'm like, but no, it's not. And so that's when I pull out this thing again and say, you know, it can sit flat on every side it is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have a point. Like I couldn't fall on this. This, when I fell on it, would stab me.
Right.
Not a good example, but they get that. So when they have a prism, I tell them, find your two bases. Your two bases are going to be opposite of each other, and they're going to be congruent, and cover them up. So when they do that, what's between those two fingers is their height of that prism. And they get confused because that formula is base times height times height.
Right.
And they need to know in the parentheses that only deals with your base. Which is your rectangles. Then this would be your height of the prism. So you really need to go over this formula and really explain more in depth when y'all get to the formula.
Right.
Because they do struggle with that. But I have noticed if we do the finger thing, that helps them. Once they cover up those bases, that helps them see that that is the height. It's connecting those two bases together.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Another thing on the triangles. If they give them a triangle and they give them this side and this side, they'll use both of those. And this other side may be over here on the
other side of the base.
yes,
Yeah.
on the other side, the other end of your prism. So they need to know, and I have them circle that right angle, and then do their 2 lines that connect to that right angle and tell them this is your base and height. If you don't have this number here, go look for it over in the other picture.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where misconceptions are going to be and where they're going to misunderstand. You're going to see them have lots of problems with that. So we've kind of gone over 3-dimensional figures and all that. This is one of your worksheets that you use for complex figures, composite figures. They're not going to be as complex as this on the STAR test. If you'll go back and look at your STAR questions, they're not going to be as complex.
Right.
So normally what I do is I go with the kids and I bust these figures up with them so we all have the same thing.
Right.
And I would have them redraw this.
Mm-hmm.
So over here, I would just have them redraw this. There's the little rectangle, and it is a 6, and I would ask them, what is this right here?
Mm-hmm.
Some of them should see that it's 26, and if not, you're going to have to point that out.
Right.
Then I would have them draw this other rectangle right here by it, which is a 18 by 26, and then I would draw my bottom piece down here so they can see that, hey, that's still the same figure, I've just busted it up.
Right.
And again, I would just go through here, bust those different ones up. I did like how you use the saying on your, for your area of your circle and your circumference.
Mm-hmm. The apple pies.
Mm-hmm. And the cherry pie.
Yeah.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Never had heard that before, so that was awesome. Okay, this is one of the lessons that you did, and I think some of them struggle with knowing how do I find my dimensions of this picture, and they need to know that they need to count these blocks.
Right.
I think the majority of them did that, but they need to be able to do that. I don't know if it's in this one. Yes, here it is. So on the circles, if you'll have them cover that up and then like maybe draw the other part of the circle so they can see that, hey, this isn't a whole circle. What part of that circle is it? Some of the kids can already see that.
Yeah.
And I would have them go ahead and write the formula, and I would put out there, divide 4.
Right.
That way they know, hey, I've still got to divide this by 4, and they should be following down their formula so they remember to divide by 4.
Right.
We stress that. Work down the page. There was one over here that, it's this one right here. They need to know that they could go find the entire area of this thing. So 28 by 16. And then subtract this part. Then subtract this part.
Yeah.
They need to be able to do that. Because most of the time we're just teaching them to go find this. We're not teaching them, hey, go find the entire thing
And
then subtract those two little pieces.
Mm-hmm.
They struggle with this one here. They need to know that when this is a right angle like that this is going to be a trapezoid. This line is parallel to this. Over here, I do not have a right angle at the bottom. It's here in the middle of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so they should know that that's my height and this is a parallelogram. So they struggle with that because they consider this to be a parallelogram too. And they need to know that that's a trapezoid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Volume, I think you need to spend a little bit more time on because this is where they struggled. I don't care if you use length and width or if you use base and height for your rectangle. And I normally show the kids both.
Right.
So that I really don't, because most of the time in the word problems, they'll tell you the length is this, the width is this.
Mm-hmm.
They also, I let the kids also know that
they have got to read the problem very carefully, because the STAR test, if you go back and look at those questions, they will tell you exactly what the figure is. So they need to know that the prism or the pyramid will be named by its base. So if they say it's a rectangular pyramid, then its base is in the shape of a rectangle.
Right.
So we need to work on that. Maybe even have them underline that. Rectangle, the word rectangular for pyramid, so they know to go look at that.
Mm-hmm.
7th grade does not have to deal with cylinders. I go ahead and show them, though. I would go ahead and show them how to work that, but they do not have to deal with cylinders. They will deal with that in 8th grade. Here's, now that one does it for you. This one has the 6 and the 6, your base and height. But I would have them come up here and circle that right angle, and then do my lines that connect me to that right angle.
Right.
That way they see what is your base and your height.
Mm-hmm.
Then have them cover up these 2 triangles, and they can see between their fingers
There's
is
the
the
height.
8. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That has been very beneficial. Okay. This is where they struggle, and this is where they need to, that's why it's important to write the B equals, A equals, because this is where they're going to be plugging in and solving. Which
Yes.
y'all worked on solving equations and whatnot. I would still do my parentheses like that, because I want them to know that's big B.
Big B, yeah.
Yes, and they need to know. Every once in a while, I would ask them, what does this mean? What do the parentheses mean? And they should be able to tell you that's your area of your base.
Right.
That's your big B. They need to know area of base there. So then I would say, where are you going to plug this in? They should know you're going to plug that in for V. What am I plugging in for L? What am I plugging in for W? So they want me to find my height.
Right.
So now I'm just going to go simplify my equation. They have been doing this on their builders in lab class. Now they need to multiply this. I think I did that right. They ought to know that when I'm side by side like that, that means multiplication.
Mm-hmm.
The opposite of that is divide.
Division.
And what am I divide by? What's with the letter? On volume on the rectangular prisms. I said this earlier, they will tell you if it's rectangular prism. And the kids need to know that, hey, my base is going to be, or bases are going to be in the shape of rectangles. This is not shaded correctly. I would shade these 2 bases because they're exactly the same shape, exactly the same size. Not really a big deal, but they'll be better off if they know that for high school. Plus, it'll make it easier for them when they're looking for a pentagonal prism, a hexagonal prism. They know to look for 2 bases that are exactly the same.
Right.
And like this one will be a little bit tougher for them to pick what would be their base there. Your top and bottom here would be your base because they're bigger ones, and there's exactly 2 of them. Triangles, this is where they have the issue. If you see here, here's my 2 triangles. If I tell them to cover those up, you see what's between my finger, it's a 6. But this is where they struggle on the triangle knowing what their base and their height is, because they're going to say it's 5. And an example I kind of show them sometimes is I will sit on the floor and say, am I sitting on my, or can I walk on this base?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't walk on my rear down the hallway. So they need to know that standing tall makes a right angle, and I would always have them circle that, and then draw those lines so they know, hey, it's this line and this line. This 5 has nothing to do with it.
Right.
I've noticed that they struggle with this formula, your pyramid formula, with this 1/3. And a lot of them say, hey, can I turn 1/3 into a decimal? No, because it's not exact. It's a repeating decimal.
Yes.
And then they won't get the exact number. And if it's a griddable,
That's important.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
very important, because they won't have the exact answer.
Mm-hmm.
So I teach them to plug into your formula. Say 5 times 2 times h. And then follow through, work down the page.
Right.
They should know I'm side by side. That means multiply. So I'm going to kind of simplify this formula.
Yeah.
And normally we say this is multiplication, so we're going to do division. But I have a fraction here, and I need to get rid of that fraction, so I'm going to do the opposite.
The reciprocal.
Yes.
Yes.
And I have to do it on both sides. I have to keep this equation balanced. So they do the dark magic. Those cancel. I'm left with 1h. And they should be able to come over here and multiply
Right.
and get
And
that right
divide.
answer. And normally it'll probably come out to a whole number.
But you just made that up.
Yes,
so.
I just made that up. So, but they need to know they cannot use 0.33 because it's not exact.
Exactly.
It's repeating.
Mhm.
And if they have to fill in a griddable,
That's important.
yes.
so,
And
yeah.
do you stress, I'm kind of getting off topic here. Do you stress on to them about pi when y'all are dealing with
Yes.
circles?
That you have to use 3.14 for griddables.
Yes.
Yes.
Otherwise, I let them use 3.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a griddable, yes, I make them use. Something else that you need to be aware of, and I kind of talked to you about this in our post-conference, was making sure you knew where your paper was.
Yes.
You've got to get used to kind of glancing back, making sure, and as you teach longer and become more familiar with it, you'll kind of be able to tell where
your
you
paper
are.
is. Mhm.
up here using your desk pad here. Did we cover the base and the height
Yes.
at the doctor's office? How I do that?
You. Not. I don't. Wait. This one you said to circle the right angle. I don't think you did that.
Okay. So base and height, they need to know create that right angle.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are 2 bases, I have them cover those 2 bases up. But they need to know that that forms a right angle, that their base and height forms a right angle. And I would use this scenario of the doctor's office when they get their measurement of the height, how they make them stand up against the wall, push the thing down on their head,
Mm-hmm.
so they know that that's base and height. There was one other thing I was going to... Oh. When students ask you questions, instead of going to the table and working specifically with that one student,
Mm-hmm.
if you know it's a problem that's kind of harder, I would just come back up here and say, hey, everybody turn to page so-and-so and look at problem so-and-so, and we would work that problem together.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily would I give them the answer, but I would prompt them into, okay, what is your next step? What are we going to do now? What is the question asking? That way you're not answering that same question.
Later.
Yes, over and over and over. And that will help with time management.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the students you may have to walk separately to. I know there's a couple of students that have to be read to.
Right.
So sometimes I just read to the entire class.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else I can clarify?
I think all that was very clear.